guys, and welcome back to ECAfrica Talks, the ECAfrica podcast. We're so excited that you've taken the time to be with us today. If you're watching us on YouTube, please go check us out on Spotify. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below. Today's entrepreneur is really exciting because her story is so special, but also it's one that speaks to the entrepreneurial journey. And so, Onkgopotse, we're really excited that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm actually a little bit nervous because you have your own podcast. So I feel like this is the first time that I'm like, get it together.
I'm like a rookie podcaster, so don't worry about me.
So something that we really like to do on our show is ask our guests to introduce themselves to our listeners and viewers, because I think it's just fun to hear from you. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your venture?
I am Onkgopotse, obviously. I am a mom, first and foremost, a beautiful 4-year-old boy. But I'm also a daughter, obviously a friend, and a founder. So I'm the founder of The Pocket Couch, which is soon to be rebranding. But we essentially created a customizable mental health care platform to help individuals and organizations better care for their mental health. And very deeply passionate about it. I didn't start off in kind of the psychology or tech space. I am financial services trained and a management consultant in my training, but it was just something that I experienced so personally and connected with it on such a deep level that I really wanted to solve for a sustainable solution.
Oh, I love that. And I love the story of the venture. I think that it's just such an important thing, especially right now when mental health is, it's almost like a buzzword, but the substance of that buzzword is so important. But before we get into that, you mentioned a finance background, but I'm always really intrigued to hear about the entrepreneurial journey and how you transitioned from, I'm assuming, corporate into being a founder and why you chose to do that. Yeah. So can you talk us through that a little bit?
It's not something I actually ever envisioned I would do. So I come from a family of, I would say, scientists. My mother is a doctor, my sister's a doctor, my dad's an engineer. So very kind of like, I suppose, traditional career paths. And the assumption was that I would follow suit. But I was already breaking the mold by choosing finance, I suppose. And I think it was just, having navigated the corporate world at the time, for like 6 years, I finally got to a place, each space I navigated, I felt like I wasn't doing meaningful work. So I kind of found myself like, I suppose millennials, they have this 2-year like shelf life of just moving from corporation to corporation. And I realized that it wasn't really about the corporations. It was just about my internal pursuit of like what I thought was purposeful and meaningful.
Right.
And then when I ended up in one of the management consultancies, I had my own personal experience with like a mental health breakdown, one could say. So I just reached a very, very debilitating place of burnout. It was a very high energy, fast-paced, quick deliverables, turnarounds, and my body just gave in. My mind and body were just like, we can't do this anymore. And I remember driving to the client at some point, and I had to like pull over because I just felt so sick and I couldn't drive myself. And, in hindsight, I'm learning now, obviously, about the gut-brain connection and how like the physical manifestation of stress and anxiety is like very underrated, that connection, but I digress. And so having experienced that and then being diagnosed with generalized anxiety, I think I just became so viscerally aware of this journey. But I started to ask myself, like, I felt very alone. Nobody was really talking as openly as they were about mental health, or as they do now post-COVID. I wasn't sure what resources to navigate at the firm. I yeah, it was just very isolating. And when I started doing some research, I realized that this thing is actually quite systemic. A lot of people are struggling with their mental health. Like, I started doing research, and it was just like, like 33% of South Africans will struggle with their mental health at some point in their lifetime, and yet only 25% will ever get the help they need. And I just started going down a rabbit hole of like why this is, what are the issues that are preventing people from getting help. And I just also reflected on my personal experience. And then I became viscerally aware of the privileged position that I was in that I was able to even afford mental health care. I mean, and that's kind of where it was birthed. But I always speak about like the straw that broke the camel's back was losing a friend to suicide. And I had already laid down started researching and whatever, but that's when I was like, this has to be something I solve for. Because I really think there are things that can be done. There are things that can be done proactively instead of necessarily retrospectively to help people, get the support they need. So how can I be, part of the story and changing the narratives around mental health stigma, and then in bridging the gap between people who need support and giving them access to that kind of support.
It's a journey that I think a lot of people walk through. But the fact that you were able to, out of this really terrible thing, right? I think mental health, I always say it's like a sexy word right now, right? And it's great. I mean,
trending.
And it's so lovely that it's become a topic of conversation. But I think the weight of walking around with it is not fully spoken about, and it is an adversity, and I think that we're strong and brave and resilient humans, and it is such a privilege to get to walk and to keep walking. But I think that it's also really special that you took this problem and created a venture that is, one, hopefully going to touch so many lives, but two, it also just speaks to you, right? You come from a finance background. Starting a business is really difficult, but you can marry your passion or this need with also having an enterprise, #social enterprises, right? And so I think that's also a really commendable thing to do, especially as a Black woman in South Africa, especially as a young Black woman in South Africa. The realities are that it's not all set up for you to succeed, and yet you've still done that, which I think is really commendable.
I tried. I will say, it wasn't like, at the time it felt like a no-brainer. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I should be doing. And in hindsight, a lot of founders will say, or people in the entrepreneurship network will say, if they knew now what they, if they knew then what they know now, they would have saved up for like 2 years to go into the space where they finally pursue this entrepreneurship thing and all these like retrospective nuggets. But just as you're speaking, I wasn't really thinking about that. I was kind of like, I really want to solve this problem. Like, I shouldn't even be in this building.
Right.
Like, this thing is what I'm meant to be doing, which is like a space of just like, it's almost like radical. You know what I mean? Because, I'm reflecting on it. I'm like, I just was so passionate and connected to this purpose that it wasn't like the most calculated decision, like, deciding to forego that income, that predictability, that I suppose there was a certain element of prestige that was attached to being working in those spaces. And to be honest, I think like even the venture landscape in tech in South Africa is evolving and like it's booming, and I don't think it was where it is at today 6 years ago. So nobody really understood why I was doing what I was doing, leaving this like corporate job. What is this founder thing? Yeah. So it wasn't like sexy yet. They were just like this crazy goal. Like,
get it together.
Like, why are you foregoing all these things you could have? But just being so connected to the purpose, I think that kind of trumped I would probably advise a founder with the knowledge I have now to like save up a bit. But sometimes you have such a burning desire and such a strong connection to solving something that like you have to lose an element of like the risk aversion that you have.
I'm personally just really intrigued by entrepreneurs and their mindsets and the way that they move, because I think that a business owner and an entrepreneur are different things. And I'm always intrigued by hearing like that passion, right? And I said to one of our other guests, like, you speak about businesses as if they are these living, breathing entities, and entrepreneurs speak about their problems as if they are these living, breathing entities that can shift and change. And it's like you're saying, it is a calling. It's a calling to this thing that you must solve. Like you have it inside of you. And I always think it's just really interesting to speak to founders who have that. But even just speaking about the founder's journey, I'm a non-technical founder in my venture. And so what is that like entering a tech space where you're marrying mental health, tech, you're creating this platform that now also Poppy, and how are you navigating this? Because it's so much all at once.
Yeah, I'm only laughing because it's just so much. And I think I'll answer the question in two parts. So the one is, I'm also a non-technical founder. So I don't have a software dev background or comp sci, whatever the case may be. But because resources were so limited at the time, and generally are, if you're building a business in the start, especially as a woman and a Black woman and all, I had to like self-teach some things. Like I built the MVP of like low code, no code tools that I had taught myself. So I didn't teach myself how to code, but there are things that I really had to learn that I didn't know. And there was no university degree or course that prepared me for the amount of learning and how steep the learning curve was. So putting that together was something else. But I think I now have a certain perspective around the technical aspects of building that I wouldn't necessarily have. So like the questions I asked, well, when we could finally bring in a dev team, they like noted how my questions are very specific and detailed, because I navigated a certain element of the journey that not everybody gets to do. Some people are lucky enough to have money to spend and outsource their tech, but I didn't really have that opportunity. So that was a lot, but I think it positioned me well for where I'm at today. Mental health. So it's a lot for sure. And sometimes I'm overwhelmed at the sheer amount of like just nuances that are at play and like how big a problem it is to solve. And I am quite overwhelmed at times. But I think what helps me is to kind of break it into the sum of its parts. So there's part of the gap in mental health care, for example, that is related to supply demand. So there're just not enough mental health care practitioners to meet the demand or the need. I think in South Africa, it's like one mental health care practitioner per 170,000 population. So obviously you have to make assumptions about how much of that population is struggling with mental health. But that in and of itself, compared to elsewhere in the world, in Europe where it's like 1 to 5,000, which is also wild, but it's still like, very apparent that there's a resource gap. Mm-hmm. That's something that needs to be solved, but like, it's not something I can solve right now.
Right.
So what I've learned to do is kind of compartmentalize and prioritize. Like what are some of the things I can solve now? So convenience is one of them. With our platform, you can, take a free screening test and answer a set of questions around your preferences, and then it'll present you with options of therapists based on your preferences and what you're struggling with. And then you can book a session with them then and there. If they happen to be available within, the next couple of hours, you can have your session. So convenience is something that I wanted to solve because it felt like something that I could solve fairly easily. But then there's also cost, and that's also one of the drivers, like lack of affordability to access mental health care resources. I realized that was more nuanced and difficult to try solve, because you've got these practitioners who are well trained and well experienced, and they deserve to be, compensated commensurate with their skill set and what they bring to the table in terms of mental health care provision. But then you've also got the people who really need help and they can't afford it. You're talking about upwards of 1,000 rand per session. So then I had to think through, like, how can I then provide additional support around therapy that is like an infrastructure of mental health care, so people can tap into other resources and tools that they can perhaps better afford? So the long and short of it is, I used to be very overwhelmed about, and I do sometimes get super overwhelmed, the extent of the problem. And because I have such a strong connection to the problem, it always created a sense of urgency when, like, I see a story about somebody who has died by suicide, or somebody who has, been committed to like a mental health care facility for life. And it really does like tug at my heartstrings. So I'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to build faster. I need to find solutions. Like, I could have helped, but I'm just learning to pace myself, give myself grace, and celebrate the small wins. Because otherwise you lose sight of the here and now and what you can do with what you have where you are. Because you're so preoccupied with what you have yet to do. And that's just a recipe for disaster, especially for someone who struggles with anxiety. So compartmentalizing and prioritizing.
And I think that's so great. I mean, it's even just hearing about it is making me think that I need to... I've almost asked everybody this off camera, whoever comes in, because I'm like, oh, I'm not a tech founder. Like, I don't fully comprehend what's happening here with this build, with this. So that can feel really overwhelming. But I love what you're saying of like, learn what you can, and that will show you the questions that you should ask and shouldn't ask. Because I think something I'm also learning from these interviews is so many people bring in teams of people, not because they can't do it, but because it's just a smarter way of building outwards instead of just building upwards, which is not sustainable. But even just, I like what you're saying of look at what you have, look at what you're doing, and not to get distracted by the world's problems because they're so big. Something we say at ECAfrica is that we really focus on unemployment, right? Because everybody's calling for entrepreneurs, it's going to solve unemployment. And so one thing we champion here is that it's never going to be solved by one solution. It will take multiple people like us all working towards creating a solution. Because look at social media, right? We have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, because each of them solve a problem and they're all working towards a certain thing of getting people connected. And so I like to think of our business like that, and everybody's business like that. We're all working towards solving the problem that we're working for. Yeah. And I think that's just it's also a really lovely thing to think that you're in a community of people that are all working towards that.
Yeah.
Something I'm just really, really intrigued about, because from my conversations with you and even just even having like a woman on this couch is always really important to me. You're a tech founder in South Africa, you're a Black woman, you're young. What is it like navigating the tech space that is so male dominated, so white dominated? What are the ins and outs of that? And also, are you seeing a change? Because I mean, you said 6 years now, so I'm hoping that you've seen a change. I'm like, please that you have seen a change.
Yeah, sure. I think even being in financial services, I navigated spaces where there was like a certain level of otherness that I felt, and because it was male dominated and white male dominated, especially in terms of the pace at which people were afforded opportunities to grow. So I think I started not making my peace with it, but learning how to navigate it quite early on anyway. I would say that the landscape has changed somewhat, but not at the pace that one would hope. And maybe it's because I'm more immersed in communities now than I was when I first started. So I can't really compare. But since I started engaging actively in communities, things have changed, just not at the pace one would hope. Like we have groups of women, like WhatsApp groups, and it's always like, they're like 10, 15% of the representation of the whole group. And that's problematic. It's incredibly difficult to, I would say, also get people to buy into an idea when they already have biases around what you can and cannot do. And so that then also comes into play when you're like seeking out investors and capital, which is why you then also see that whilst, of course, venture capital funding isn't, the only source of funding, but only 2% of women, acquire or get venture capital funding. And that number hasn't changed significantly. So that is already an anecdote around like how difficult it is to navigate. And I think what ends up happening with women founders, they've been found to be a lot more capital efficient and resource efficient. And they've been found to be, a lot leaner in the way they operate their enterprises, especially in the beginning, but not by choice. Yes. Because we've had no other choice. Do you understand? If I'm getting 100 Rand and my male peers are getting, 10,000 Rand, I'm going to have to make do with my 100 Rand. So how can I allocate these resources as efficiently and in as lean a possible way to get there? What it then does do, though, it does, I think, in many ways, limit your time to execution, to like getting stuff out there, because you don't have the backing of like teams and capital. You have to just be very smart about how you make your way through building this product and solving for this customer's pain point. It's been incredibly challenging, I would say, but I've worked in incredibly challenging work environments, so I can't say I wasn't somewhat prepared for the difficulty of the journey that I would be navigating. Like, it didn't shock me. You know what I mean? So I came in there knowing this is going to be tough. Like, people are going to have biases, even though they're not going to communicate them outwardly, but it'll show in like how, difficult it is to get funding, or like how difficult it is for people to actually buy into your idea when you're like doing your elevator pitch or whatever the case may be. I think what's frustrating is as the discourse and the narratives, we're talking more about this disparity specifically in tech. It's almost like people are like getting a sense of like fatigue. Like, sure. People are like, oh my gosh, we know women only get 2% of VC funding. Like, we know, like, and I think that's deeply problematic, because we shouldn't be stopping or halting the discussions because people are getting tired. People aren't tired enough to change the narrative. So why should we stop talking about it? And like, I think while you obviously have to be like play your cards right, you can't just like completely lament how difficult it is to be a Black woman founder every day on LinkedIn, because unfortunately you've got to manage perceptions. But I just still think we should continue to be real about these things until the narrative changes. It doesn't mean we should stop doing things and stop trying to build, and like that it should discourage us from, taking our businesses forward. But I just think we will keep talking about it until the narrative and landscape changes.
Right, and even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I think when I first entered in, I was like, oh, well, what is this? And you're trying to navigate a space where you don't even know the questions to ask. And that's not just a female founder thing, right? That's just going into a tech space. If you're not from a tech background, you don't even know the questions to ask. But I'm also really encouraged from hearing from you. I mean, we belong to the same network, and I'm really encouraged by the women in that network. But more than that, I'm also just really encouraged by women on social media across the world, because as much as people are tired, there seems to be this, I am a woman in tech, or I'm a woman in STEM, but I'm also a founder of a really badass company, regardless of my gender, regardless of my race. And these women who are questioning why they weren't funded or for what reasons wasn't I taken into consideration. And when you look through that list, the stark reality is because she was a woman, right? And so going to the funders and saying, listen, you can say we're not filling the tick boxes, but here are our tick boxes and they're all there. So you have to deal with your own internal bias because we're not going to go anywhere. Yeah. Like, we're not going to disappear. We're going to keep making really great businesses. We're going to keep changing the communities that we're in. And I know that it seems like I'm like, but the reality is that the reality
You're like preaching to the choir, but yeah.
The reality is that women sit down and they have conversations across from each other, but also their businesses, whether or not they're impact businesses, they impact the communities that they're in. Female founders are more empathetic. They're more likely to take into account their employees' mental health. They're more likely to invest in the communities around them. So it's not a taboo to invest in females. And it's not a taboo to say, like, hey, listen, we can go toe-to-toe with the guys if that's what you would like us to do. But it's also okay to correct what has been wronged. Because we can go pitch with them, but if you're not going to even look at me because I'm a woman, rather just, I'm so done with like the window dressing of like, oh, this is our one founder, and you pull her out at every tech thing, at every talk, and you're like, she's doing so great, and we're all like, yes, we know, we too would like to be great, and so I think I'm really encouraged by this conversation because it isn't this like screaming and crying. It's more like, well, this is what I'm doing, these are the adversities, but how do I work within the community, and how do I've noticed with you've also got a really strong network of women around you, of founders around you who are all working towards breaking down these barriers, but also just being really good business owners, which I think is so important as well, that as women, we speak to each other, we uplift each other, we walk with each other, because nobody really knows what it's like to be doing this.
I think what's also really great is now you're seeing the emergence of more women as capital allocators. So as you begin to see women that are in key decision-making spaces who are investing more in women or women-owned businesses, who are taking those bets that, perhaps their male peers would have not taken. That's also super encouraging, because as you invest in women-owned businesses and you start to see the ROI, you now have data that supports these assertions that women can, and empirically to some degree, be better founders or create better businesses than men or male-owned businesses. And I think that's such a critical piece of the puzzle as well, is to say, okay, well, if men are not going to invest in women, then let's get more women that are allocators of capital, because then we can invest in ourselves. So I'm very, very big on supporting my friends who are in the space and really rooting for them so that they can, be the decision makers. And I think there should definitely be more of an emphasis on building women up in the capital allocation space. So we just build on that momentum.
Oh, I love that. And you're so right. It's not even something I thought about, but there are so many investors now that look like me or that talk like me. And so that's really encouraging. Yeah. So we're speaking about investors and capital and all of this. I'm just really intrigued about what the journey has been for you guys. I know that you're having a brand shift, which is always really exciting. But this is your baby, right? This is something that you started. And so how did you navigate this funding, investment, capital, I want to stake in your business, knowing when and how to access capital is something I'm always really intrigued about.
I don't got that. No, so I think you're constantly learning. When I first started out, I didn't even know what VC funding was. And I have a financial services background. I knew about hedge funds, asset managers, portfolio. I just didn't know about VC funding. So now imagine operating from a finance background, not knowing like the intricacies of tech funding. I'm already in a position of privilege because I have some sort of finance background, but that still didn't prepare me for navigating the funding landscape, in tech, in the tech ecosystem. So I will say that most of the, ideation and whatnot happened while I was still working, and I then started my own freelance consulting company. So I had some clients there, and that was kind of making me money while I was trying to ascertain if this thing is worth pursuing. So primarily it was bootstrapped and client funded. We were lucky enough to get a early client, early adopter. It was an organization like one of the most one of the largest e-hailing companies on the continent, to become one of our clients early on. And that was when I had an Excel spreadsheet and my phone. I literally was calling people to find out what they would need in a therapist, and then matching them manually with therapists. And that's what I just had to do. I didn't have a choice because, one, I didn't really have a knowledge around the funding landscape and where to go. I didn't, angel investors. We didn't speak about angel investors when I was working in corporate. For a long time, I didn't know much. What I think helped me was, again, I always speak about community. I find out I derive so much value from this community that we're in. Learning things, still learning things that I never knew before. People sharing opportunities for funding or pitching competitions or whatever the case may be. That's what really has helped me learn, because you won't know which resources to tap into other than either tapping into all of them, which is nearly impossible and super inefficient, or asking people who've navigated the same path, or who are navigating the same path to show you, there was a mindset I had earlier on where when I learned about VC funding, I was like, that is the only funding one needs to get. If I'm going to be a tech founder, I need to get VC funding. And by being involved in these communities and learning from people, I realized that's not the only avenue available to me, right? I would just say I learned the most from the people that I worked with and people that are building. There's no textbook. There's no there's no manual for this. I didn't know about it, but I created my own manual by leveraging people's experiences and tapping into people who are willing to teach me and show me things blind spots that I have and things that I wouldn't otherwise have known. I'm really happy though that those allies, those mentors, those founders that are also building, I think are equally men and women. So having sponsors and mentors and peers that don't look like you, that can get you into rooms that you wouldn't otherwise be in, or speak about your tables that you wouldn't otherwise, have an opportunity to sit at, is crucial. It's super important.
I mean, you mentioned something that stuck out to me, because I think I had the same thing, right? You come into the tech space and everybody's like, oh, my VC this, my VC that, I'm going to pitch. First you're like, I'm so sorry. What is a VC? What are these two letters mean?
I literally thought VC was vice chancellor.
I was like, same. I was like, oh, okay, guys, great. And you're just like, yeah, no, same. Okay, so we have spoken a little bit about your journey, about how you got to this point, but also about your passion for community and for mentors and for walking for walking with people that are doing similar things, but also doing such different things. And at ECAfrica, we really like to learn about what's happening on the ground. And so something we ask our guests to do, which might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but nobody's struggled yet, is we like to ask you guys, who are you looking at? Who are some entrepreneurs that you think you should shout out, or shows, or resources that you think people should use? Because I think we can only hear about new entrepreneurs from entrepreneurs that are working with them. And so is there anybody that you think we should have an eye on?
There's so many. I'm trying to synthesize. Okay, so on the founder space, there's 3 particular founders I'm really excited about. Bertha Hukong, so she's the founder of Karabo AI. It's essentially this incredible chatbot builder. Anyone can build a chatbot using her software, and it's super customizable. So it's really great. I think it's really going to be transformative. And then Karabo Murule. So I don't know if you've already had her, but she's building this incredible platform that essentially democratizes investing in art, which is so needed.
So cool.
And then Zanella Abraham, who is building an incredible primary healthcare network. So they essentially provide primary healthcare services on the ground to organizations. She's building Wello, super phenomenal, learning a lot from her.
I'm definitely going to go give that a shot, because I think that you're so right. You don't know what you're going to learn when you read something, 100%. When you listen to a show. And so yeah, that's very cool. Yeah. And then the last question we have with you is, it's my personal favorite thing to ask anybody, but I think that it's just so important. What is some advice that has been given to you, or advice that you tell other entrepreneurs and tech founders on their journey that you think that somebody should hear?
I think I'm speaking to the perfectionists in the in the virtual room. I would say don't chase perfection, chase validation. And what I mean by that is a lot of founders fall into the trap, including myself, of being married to a specific solution that you've hypothesized, what the product will look like, and then solving for that and hoping the customers come because of how great the product looks or how well it functions according to you. But oftentimes starting with, that's why it's called an MVP, starting with the bare bones of something and testing whether or not people buy into that, and if they're not, why not, then validating the next thing is just so much better. It's so much more efficient. It's so much more insightful. And then you're building for the customer you're solving for, not for what you think you ought to be solving for, and how perfect you think it ought to be. Because some of the things that you hypothesize are meaningful for your customers actually may not be. And you don't, you're not able to identify those gaps unless you're constantly validating or doing these experiments to validate or invalidate what your assumptions have been. And I wish I knew that earlier. I remember one of my mentors showed me I can't remember what the name of the website is, but it essentially shows you the first version of some of these big apps and websites. And he showed me the Facebook one. And I was like, oh my gosh. You're spending so much time trying to beautify or optimize the UX and all sorts of things when it did what it needed to do back then. And then off of that data from the clients and how they're engaging the platform, they were able to iterate and do better. It looks, for all intents and purposes, pretty whack. But now look, so I would say execution over perfection for sure.
And I think that's such an important thing to say to people who are on the journey, because you can get so wrapped up by it, right? Wanting to get it perfect, wanting to put out this really perfect thing into the world. And the first time somebody uses it, they don't like it. And that makes you really sad. Yeah. But the reality is that's good. It means that they're engaging in a way that you haven't engaged in 100%. It. They're finding problems that maybe somebody else is going to find in it. And so I think that's just a really good piece of advice. Thank you for coming on our show and sharing so generously with us. Also, just thank you for the space that you're creating, because I think you guys are going to do such great work, and you guys are currently doing such great work. And so it's really special to get to sit across from a founder who has such a heart for what they're doing and such a passion for it, because it makes me so excited for it, because you're like, oh, I also want to go back to my venture and I want to speak about it with such pride. And so I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
So, guys, you can find us on ECAfrica on all our platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube, please check us out on Spotify. And if you're listening on Spotify, watch us on YouTube. Share it to a friend of a friend. Leave comments down below. Tell us who you would like to see next. And any questions that you think we should ask our entrepreneurs. And then where can they find you and your new rebrand?
So we were the Pocket Couch, and now you'll probably be the first to know. We are rebranding to Amari Health. Amari means strength in Yoruba and Swahili. And we just believe there's so much strength and courage that it takes to ask for help and admit that you need help in the mental health care space. So just honoring the brave steps our people take to get help. So they can find us at now www.amari.health, and we are Amari Cares on all major social media platforms. You'll see a lot of comms around the Pocket Couch and like ushering a new era, but I'm excited for this new era.
Thank you again for being here. We really, really enjoyed it. And I can't wait to see what you guys are going to do and where you guys are going to go, because it's such an exciting space. So yeah, thank you guys for listening and watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.